right, I've gotten some questions about the different ways that watercolor comes in. And so today I'm going to show the ways that I know that they come in and how you can use each one. Fundamentally, they're all the same in that they are watercolor, and there shouldn't be too much difference between the different ways they come. But we'll see. I've never actually done this test before, so this will be kind of interesting. So I have a tube of Schmincke Perylene Green, which is a really beautiful deep green color. And then I have the same color, the Schmincke Perylene Green, in a pan. So this is a half pan. And paints that come in pans also come in full pans, which is about twice the size. I'm usually getting half pans because that's what works better for me in travel palettes and that sort of thing. But if there's a color I use a lot, sometimes I'll get a full pan. And I didn't have another kind of this particular color in the Schmincke brand, but I thought I would also show this, which is a watercolor stick by Daniel Smith. And this is in sap green, and this is very similar, if not the same. Although I think the production process is a little different, but it's very similar to a pan watercolor, because essentially a pan watercolor with the brands that have the same formula for their tube paint and their pan paint, it's essentially just the tube paint put into a pan and dried. And I'm not sure what process Daniel Smith uses, but it's essentially the same concept. It's a dried version of the sap green paint, watercolor paint. So I'm going to save this one for last, and I will work on these two first. So I have a brush here. I'm just using a synthetic Princeton brush in a number 10 round. I'm going to wet that. And I'm going to start with the pan color just right out of the pan without doing anything to it. So, let's see. So we've got, there you go, right? So that's without wetting it first. So because it is dry, what I will often do, and I'll do that now so that we can see if there's any difference, I will take some water on the brush, just sort of put a dab of water on there, a drop of water, and let it sit there and soak in. So we'll get back to that in a second and see if it made any difference. So this is the tube paint. Oh, and this tube is a little tight. Okay. And sometimes when you open the tubes, you will get that. There's a little bit of flaking of dried paint that sometimes happens around the tube. Okay, so I'm gonna put a little bit on the paper, just like that, just a little bit. A little bit goes a really long way with these, even though they're essentially the same concentration. It's super strong, especially with this brand. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to touch the end of it and sort of go out here. Okay, and you'll see that right out of the tube you're getting more pigment that's coming into the water than you are with the one that came out of the pan. So Schmincke is a brand that I know uses the same formula for its tubes and its pans. And they actually go through a really painstaking process to make their pans. I think they have 4 different layers where they essentially pour, or if you were doing it yourself, you would essentially squeeze it into the tube. So they do that once, they dry. They do it another time, and then they dry it. And then they do it another time, and they dry it, and then they top it off, and they dry it one more time. So the water evaporates from the paint that would be in the tube. And that's how you get a dry pan. This particular brand re-wets really, really well, which is part of why I like it. You don't generally need to put water on it like this, but sometimes it helps a little. You can also spritz it with a spray bottle, or use a little eyedropper and put some water in at the beginning before you paint. So I'm actually going to go into this one now that's been sitting, and we'll see if it makes. Okay, I'm gonna hold on to it. Oh my goodness, I mean, look at that. That's crazy. That's a crazy amount of pigment. So if I did the same thing with the paint out of the tube, I would get the same kind of result. And one thing that is in favor of pans rather than tubes or dried out versions is that you're not going to use as much paint. Because if you see, and this is part of the reason why I don't always wet my pans ahead of time, I'll just let them wet as I work, is because you'll end up using so much more paint when you're using the tube, because it's essentially all, it's very highly pigmented, and because it's already wet, you can use more than you think you might want to use. With the pan, you can see this was just with a touch of water at the very beginning. You're not getting much. Okay, sorry, I'm getting some extra pigment there. But if you let it sit, you're getting this whole amount of pigment here. Not all brands will re-wet as easily as this particular brand. This is obviously an artist grade, but it's very expensive in the United States, but I have been able to find it relatively inexpensively, and I say inexpensively for artist grade is still, you know, higher than if you have a student grade. But I've been able to find them relatively inexpensively at Jackson's Art Supply, and they're located in the UK, and they will ship to the United States. They usually have either really low cost or free shipping, depending on what you get. The only problem with them is that sometimes it'll take a while to get, and also my mail delivery people have sometimes, because it requires a signature when I get it, they sometimes say, oh, there was no one there, and then they walk away with it, and then I have to go actively find the package. So that's a little annoying. If it's our regular mail person, she knows we're there and that, you know, what our deal is, and she's not a problem. But if we get another one, it can be difficult. But even with all that hassle, it's such a huge price difference on this brand in particular that I'll still order from them if I need this. So this is a 5mm or milliliter tube, and this will last you a long time. Like you don't need to get the bigger one if you just want to try it out. The pans, you know, I can't remember how much. So the pans will actually last you longer than the tube, but I can't remember how much they are if you buy them individually, because I've bought a couple of sets, again from Jackson's, because if you buy sets in the United States, they're like crazy expensive. But with Jackson's, you can get, you know, sometimes they go on sale, and it's actually a pretty decent deal. And if you wanted to make your own pan, I wanted to talk about that. If you wanted to make your own pans of watercolor, you would do a similar process as what they would do in the factory. You could fill them 4 times and let them dry after each filling, or you could just fill it once, let it sit out for a night, and then use it that way, and that'll allow you to use less pigment and not use up your paint so fast. You could also obviously put it in Amazon sells empty pans, both in half pan and full pans, that are really cheap, and it's pretty convenient. But you know, it just depends on whether you want a nice full pan, in which case you'd want to put it in a few times and let it dry after each time. Or if you just want to let it dry out a little so that you're using paint more economically, you could do that just once or twice. I think twice is the maximum amount that I've ever done, but sometimes they will dry out. When they dry out, there'll be a little bit of a dip, and it won't be this, you know, perfectly flattened thing. Because this is actually, it came this way. This is the pan that came this way. I did not make that. So now I'm going to show you. Hopefully that gave you a little bit of a sense of the differences. Now I'm going to show you the watercolor stick from Daniel Smith. So you could, if you wanted to put these in a watercolor palette, you could essentially hack off a little piece I've done it with a knife before, and you can just put a little water on the bottom of the piece that you cut off and then stick it with water into a pan, or another surface. Like if you just have a container where you want to put bits of paint, you could just put a little water on the bottom and it'll stick with just the water. Or you could just leave it like this. You can actually use it dry. It doesn't blend as well though when it's dry. You'll see here, I'll put water on there. You're still gonna see that line, which I don't really like, so I don't use it that way. You could use it to sketch, I suppose. I've never tried it that way. But if you just want to use it off of the stick, so you'll wet that, and then you would use it like paint, and it actually, looks pretty good. Looks just like paint. Go figure. You could also do the same thing if it's actually in a pan, or you've put it in a little half pan when it's cut off. You could put a little water on, let it sit. But again, it doesn't really seem like you need to. This was completely dry that I put it on here. So I think that essentially sums it up and tells you what the difference is between these different kinds of paint. Oh, yeah, I didn't even realize you could actually, once it's wet, you could probably get a better line. Oh, that's a new thing. Okay. But you can still see the lines. Okay. All right, so I'll talk more about watercolor and how to specifically use it and all of that in future videos, but this was really just to show the differences between the way that watercolor comes. One last thing, I am an advocate of using artist grade paint, even if that seems like a stretch for you and it's kind of expensive. You're going to be so much happier with the results that you get with artist grade paint. If you absolutely can't afford that and you want to go with a student grade paint, I would go with Cotman brand from Winsor Newton. That's probably the best I've seen of a student grade paint, and they're way, way cheaper, but they still have a pretty good pigment load. That's really the difference between artist grade and student grade. Is the amount of pigment. You're going to get a ton of pigment in artist grade paint. It'll actually go a lot longer way. You won't have to use as much of it. And sometimes also the student grade paints will have extra fillers that may make your paint look a little funny, like a little shiny or something. It's just not as good for, if you're going to take the time to learn watercolor or paint a beautiful scene, you want it to look nice. And this is a way that you can get a head start on that, even if you don't have a high level of skill with watercolor yet. Okay, so that's it for now, and thank you for watching. Please feel free to like and or subscribe down below, and I will put links to all of these products here that I've used today, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.